Good morning, everyone. We're in Perek Lamed Chet of Sefer Yeshayahu. And Perek Lamed Chet, chapter 38, Sefer Yeshayahu. And just to remind you of where we were at, this is the section of Yeshayahu that is actually paralleled in two other places, one in Divrei Hayamim Bet and the other in Melachim Bet. It is the account of Sancheriv's siege on Yerushalayim and Chizkiyahu's salvation by a miraculous intervention of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Last week, we dealt more, or 2 weeks ago, we dealt more with the issue of the siege. This week, we're going to encounter now a new wrinkle within this entire story, and that is the question of Yeshayahu's illness. The first thing I just want you to look at, please, is if you would take this sheet, which has two sides to it. Now, on this sheet, this is from the book, which I use from time to time, called Makbilot Bamikra, where it shows parallel stories within the Torah. If you notice, in this column is Perek Chaf, chapter 20 of Sefer Melachim Bet. In this column is Perek Lamed Chet, the chapter we're going to be studying. And if you look at the beginning, there are very minor differences between the two. One of the differences you'll note is that right after, in the Yeshayahu account, the editor of this edition popped in two psukim from the end of the chapter, which in Melachim appear in the story in a more chronological fashion. So that's verses 21 and 22. The end of the perek actually should have been earlier. But if you turn to the other side, you see a massive difference. And this entire blank of Sefer Melachim is filled in Sefer Yeshayahu. And it is the prayer and also the thanksgiving that that Chizkiyahu HaMelech gives for being healed from his illness. And the important thing to remember is that when a story is told more than one time in the Tanakh, there's a reason for differences that occur. Something that is highlighted with this book, the Makbilot Bamikra, makes it very visual for us to see the difference. And this is a real simple thing, that from Pasuk Tet until Pasuk Chaf, in this week's Perek, what we're really seeing is Yeshayahu at work. That the purpose of Sefer Melachim is more historical. It's the story of the kings. The purpose of Sefer Yeshayahu is not historical. It's not meant as a historical document. Any history that is presented in Sefer Yeshayahu is meant as background to the story, to the prophecies, to the poetry, to all of the pieces, the eternal messages of Yeshayahu and Avi. And therefore, when it came to Sefer Melachim, his prayer of thanksgiving wasn't really a necessary part of the story. Rather, what's the most important part of the story in Sefer Melachim is the fact that he took ill and that God healed him. Here, however, the reason for this perek are those psukim, are the prayers, and are his statements that he's making, which are for all eternity, versus the history, which is just background. And so the fact that those couple of psukim in history are kind of put in a different place, and that in our Sefer and Sefer Yeshayahu, and that in Melachim, all of it's missing, it's not a problem and not a challenge. It actually just highlights the differences between these two accounts. So we go now to Perek Lamed Chet, to the beginning of the Perek, and again, it starts out in a very historical piece, and it says, Bayamim ahem, Pasuk Aleph, Chala Chizkiyahu lamut. Chizkiyahu was stricken with a deathly illness. Vayavoy elav Yeshayahu ben Amoz Hanavi, and Yeshayahu appeared to him. Vayomer elav, and he said to him, Ko amar Hashem, God is commanding as follows of you, Tzav leveitecha, command your house. In other words, tell him what your final wishes are. Kimetata velo tichya, because you're going to die and you're not going to survive. Vayasev Chizkiyahu. Well, we'll get to it. We're going to get to it. I'm just going to translate the first few pieces, and we'll get into the explanation. Vayasev Chizkiyahu panav el akir vayitpalel el Hashem. And Chizkiyahu turned to the wall and he prayed to God. So there's a lot of questions in these two first psukim. Bayamim ahem, in those days. The question is, those days obviously are referencing what happened in the previous parak. And where the previous parak ended off was Sancheriv's army had been decimated by a miraculous intervention. Sancheriv had run back home. Ultimately, he was killed by his sons. So Bayamim Ahem, in those days, are referring to that entire story. But what part of the story are they referring to? So if we take it according to the simple explanation, and perhaps the majority of explanations, Rashi's approach, Rashi says this story of Chizkiyahu's illness took place right before Sancheriv's army was killed. So it's Sancheriv's previous parak, Sancheriv's army is destroyed. Sancheriv goes home. At a later point, he's assassinated by his sons. By Amim Ahem, in the midst of that previous parak, in the middle of it. And the reason we come to this is just by simple calculus from other psukim. Because if you look in Malachim Bet Yudchet, and you don't have to, Yudchet Bet, we know that Chizkiyahu reigned for 29 years. If we look in this week's parak, we see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to add to his life 15 years. So that means that from this point onward is another 15 years, that this took place in the 14th year of his reign. The illness was in the 14th year of his reign. According to Yeshayahu Lamed Vav, when all of the story of the siege began, Sancheriv laid the siege in the 14th year of Chizkiyahu's reign. So we know by Yamim Ahem is at the time of the siege. Now, in addition to it, what we know from our parak, that we have a statement in Pasuk Vav, Umikaf Melech Ashur Atzilcha, that God promises Yeshayahu, I will save you from the hands of Ashur. So if we put this all together in a nice, simple package, we know the story of his illness took place in the 14th year of his reign. We know the 14th year of his reign was the siege of Ashur. And we know that after the illness was completed, God tells him, I'm going to save you from Ashur. So it must have taken place before Ashur was decimated by miraculous fashion, because that's the natural salvation of Ashur. And that's the approach that is the Radak and the approach of Rashi. That's a simple approach. In fact, Rashi says on the third day of the illness was when Chizkiyahu was healed, is the very same day of when God comes and destroys Sancheriv's army, which happens to be, by the way, Pesach. All of that is happening at the same time. The Ralbag, however, says, by Yamim Ahem, the Ralbag says, no, I want to take a chronological perspective based on the psukim. That if Chizkiyahu had gotten sick in the middle of the siege, something should have been said. That it happens in the 14th year, you can't deny. But it actually happened after the siege had been broken. What does it mean then when it says that God will promise Chizkiyahu that he's going to save him from Ashur? What the Ralbag says, he's going to save him from the son of Sancheriv, who naturally would probably come to force and want to finish off the job that his father had done. It's a future salvation, not from a threat that is present, but a threat that could occur. God is promising it won't happen. So all of this is happening in that 14th year. There's no question about it, but all of it is happening either during the siege or immediately after the siege. Now, to go back to Yafa's point, v'lo tichyem, that when God says that you're going to die from this illness and you won't live, well, the simplest of pshat is just emphasis. But in this case, Rashi opts for the other explanation, which is based on the Medrash. Not only will you not live, but you will not have eternity in Olam Haba. You have sinned in such a manner that you're not going to get your heavenly reward. What was the sin? The Gemara in Brachot says that Chizkiyahu saw Beruach HaKodesh, he saw in divine inspiration of some fashion, that his son was going to be Menashe, one of the most evil of kings, and he chose not to get married as a result and not to have a Menashe. And God says to him that this sin is so significant that he's not going to be able to have his place in the world to come. Yeah.
What about the righteous descendants of Menashe?
Okay, so you know what
Bringing into the world
is let's take it like this. Chizkiyahu ultimately does get married, and after this story, we know that after this story, that when Menashe sends the throne, he's 12 years old, which means he is that 12. That his father dies when he's 12 years old. He ascends the throne, which means that Chizkiyahu is 14 years. Okay, within a couple of years after this story, Menashe is going to be born. Chizkiyahu does get married in the end, and so whether that was his cheshbon or the cheshbon was, I was wrong that I have to be married. That was and continue, by the way, the Davidic dynasties. That this was his issue. One other piece of it is the Radak, by the way, goes back to Sefer Melachim, and he says that we see that all of this was really true, that lo tichya, you won't have a continuation because he wasn't married. It's another way of saying it. There will be nothing left of you. He turns, then when he hears this, he turns to the wall and he prays to God. So there's two, again, significant pieces. Let's imagine the scene for the moment. Who's in the room? The two people we know for sure who are in the room is Chizkiyahu and Yeshayahu Hanavi. If you need a prayer, who would you normally turn to? Yeshayahu. The fact that he chose on his own to pray on his own is a powerful statement. It means that there was a of understanding that Yeshayahu's decree was such that he couldn't turn to Yeshayahu and ask him to pray. Yeshayahu was telling him what God was going to say. He's going to do it himself. Also shows an element of his righteousness. Yeah.
So, but it does say, Hashem, he's giving a prophecy. What was the point of the prophecy to say you're going to die if there was no reason, no option for doing prayer?
Well, so that again shows Chizkiyahu's, his faithfulness in this, that he believes the way it's presented to him by Yeshayahu, it seems like this is a fait accompli. There's nothing you can do about this. Too bad, too late.
Even if he said, it looks like, as an agent of God, he's saying, tough luck, guys, you're done.
Right, 100%, which makes sense also why he wouldn't turn to Yeshayahu. He does it himself. He feels he can still do tshuva, overturn what had been going on, and that's the point. But the other question remains, so I understand now he doesn't turn to Yeshayahu. Now, there most likely are other people in the room as well, whether it's other nobles within the room. The king didn't sit by himself. But the other question is, why does he turn to the wall? So the Radak says in Sefer Melachim, where this story is told, he turns to the wall because he wants to have kavanah, he wants to daven. Okay, if he wants to daven, he doesn't want to be davening to all the people who are sitting in front of him. He's going to have kavanah, he's going to daven. The Targum Yonatan says, L'kotel Beit Mikdasham. He actually is turning to the Beit HaMikdash, to the wall of the Beit HaMikdash. If you remember, the palace complex was connected to the temple complex. There was a pathway that connected the two. He turns to the wall of the Beit HaMikdash. This is the form of his prayer. It's somewhat of a fulfillment of what Shlomo HaMelech had said when he built the Beit HaMikdash, following the building in Malachim Aleph, where he says, Asher Yidaun Ish, that if something's going to happen, he's going to put out his hands, and that's a statement of prayer. He's going to extend his hands to this place. The Abarbanel says that he turns to the wall, and it's a very sad piece because he has no one else to turn to. He has no family. He doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have children. He has no one else to cry to. So this is a sign of his isolation from everyone else around. The Dat Mikra says, wait, we have precedent for turning to the wall for a ruler turning to the wall. Yosef, when Yosef was about to break out in tears, he turned to the wall so people wouldn't see him cry, because this was unbecoming of a king. So it may be that. Now, ultimately, we're not sure why he did it, but there's some fascinating possibilities that he turns to the wall and he breaks out in prayer, and he does it himself, Vayomar, and he says, Ana Hashem. Okay, he says, Ana Hashem. Now, Ana Hashem, normally we would translate Aleph, Nun, Aleph. Please God, okay, which is a simple pshat that Dat Mikra says it. But the Targum Yonatan says, Kabel B'uti Hashem. It's please, in other words, he says, I'm asking you to accept my request, okay, similar to the Ana with the Aleph. Rashi says, Aye Rachmanotecha. Rashi, though, says, Ana Hashem, where, God, is your mercy? Zacharna et asher hitalachti lefanecha. I am asking that you remember that I walked before you, be'emet, in truth, of a lev shalem, and with a full heart. V'atov beinecha asiti, and I did what was good in your eyes. Vayev Chizkiyahu b'chi gadol, and he cried this great cry. Now, interestingly, Jacob Jaffe, in his commentary on Sefer Yeshayahu, it's a new one that came out a year or two ago, he says that what's significant here is he's saying, heal me because of what I have done. And the reason why that's significant is because ultimately, when you see God's response in Pasuk Hey, it'll say, Haloch v'amarta el Chizkiyahu, Yeshayahu is instructed to tell Chizkiyahu, Ko amar Hashem Elokei David Avicha. The Chizkiyahu is going to be told, I'm going to heal you, not because of you, but b'zchut David, because of David HaMelech. Okay, and ultimately, that is a piece, a literary piece you need to see. Chizkiyahu says, heal me because of who I've done, what I am and what I've done. And Hashem says, I'm going to heal you because of David. That's step one. The Dat Sofer and Rabinowitz suggests it's a little bit different. Chizkiyahu knows that God is not happy with him because he never got married. But what Chizkiyahu is telling HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I did it l'shem shamayim. I've always done right things. So what I did now is right. And I wanted this, and don't punish me for a sin that I thought I needed to commit. It was a sin. We have this concept in halacha of a sin l'shem shamayim. There was a bigger purpose behind it. The Radak says that ultimately, Vatov beinecha asiti, that there's a medrash that it was Chizkiyahu who hid the Sefer HaRefuot, who hid the book of healings that had been composed by Shlomo HaMelech. The reason is there was a book of healings that people would rely upon when they took sick. And what they started to do by the time of Chizkiyahu is they started to believe more in the book than in God. Okay, we have that problem nowadays also. Sometimes people believe more in doctors than they do in God. Okay, and that's part of the explanation that's often given on why Tov Sheberofim legehenom, where Chazal say that the best of doctors are going to hell, and the reason is because sometimes doctors begin to believe that it's all in their hands, and it's a danger. Shlomo HaMelech, however, had compiled this book. Chizkiyahu had hidden it away. Vatov beinecha asiti. That Chizkiyahu turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, I've always done what was right. And by the way, I don't have access to heal myself. I did what you wanted me to do for the greater good. And now I need your help. Vayhi devar Hashem el Yeshayahu lemor. So Hashem speaks to Yeshayahu. Now it's interesting. Vayhi devar Hashem el Yeshayahu lemor. The Barbanel says this was an immediate response. An immediate response to what he had requested. And in fact, if you look on the comparison sheet, okay, where you see Sefer Melachim there, if you look, it goes, the words are, let's see if I can find it. number 4. Vayehi Yeshayahu lo yatsa chatzar hatichona. Yeshayahu still had not gone out into the outer chamber. Udvar Hashem haya elav limor. And God's word were to him. If you look, it was just according to the Ta'amim, if you look at the Tamei HaMikra on it, it's like Yeshayahu just took 3 steps. Why do you see that? Vayehi Yeshayahu, it says, lo yatzam. Over the word yatzar, the 2 dots is a kef katan. That's the first step. It's a munach, lo yatzam. Under the lo is a munach, lo yatzam. Ha'ir hatichona. Then you have an etnachta. Okay. Again, another stop. Udvar Hashem haya elav lemor. And God appeared to him then, saying, these additional stops within the pasuk, which are, if you're a good English teacher, some of you are here, a good English teacher, you would say there's too many commas in the sentence. Okay, it should be just maybe you want to put a comma after hatichona. The fact that there are additional commas based on the Tamei HaMikra seems to imply that this was just a few steps afterwards. Hashem responds to him. Haloch v'amarta l'Chizkiyahu pasuk. Go and tell Chizkiyahu, Ko amar Hashem Elokei David avicha. We already mentioned the issue of David and not Chizkiyahu's zchut. Shamati et tfilatecha. I've heard your prayer. Ra'iti et dimatecha. I've seen your tears, so I know it is sincere. Hineni yosif al yamecha 15 shana. I'm going to add onto your years another 15 years. The Dat Mikra has an interesting theory. And the Dat Mikra says that this 15 years, the number 15, may have been added later when this book was being written. Because we know that this sefer is being written by Chizkiyahu, Beit Dino, being written by Chizkiyahu and his Beit Din, his sefer Yeshayahu. And for a person to know how many years they're going to live, the Gemara in Shabbos says this is not a bracha. It's not good to know. We all get to live, with the imagination that we're eternal and with the reality that it's not. And so that tension is good. But to say, a person's going to pass away in year X is not good. So the Dat Mikra says it may have been that this was the precise number that the pasuk may have originally been. Hineni yosif al yamecha. I'm going to give you more days. And stop. 15 shana may have been extra. The Dat Sofrim says that ultimately in this case, the 15 years may have been said because Chizkiyahu, you have a certain number of years, you got a lot of work to do. So don't hesitate to do your work. That this was a way of motivating him to move forward. Umikaf melech Ashur atzilcha, as we read already, I'm going to save you from melech Ashur. 2 possibilities of what that means. Possibility 1 is talking about the siege. That seems to be the majority of the Meforshim. Possibility number 2, we mentioned the Ralbag, that it's some future threat. I'm going to save you. V'eta'ir azot, and I'm also going to save this city. V'ganoti alei azot, and I will protect this city. Not only, okay, should you think that this prophecy and this promise is about you, it's also about Yerushalayim at the same time. V'zeh lecha ha'ot eme'et Hashem. And this is the sign from God. Okay, and what's the sign from God? Asher yaseh Hashem, which God will do at the davar zeh diber, that God said He will do what He is planning on doing. Now, at the end of the parak, we're going to read that Chizkiyahu is going to request a sign, and the reason why he's going to request a sign, according to the simple explanation, is that Chizkiyahu, and this is Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, which is from this piece of the collected writings. It's volume 4. So I'm just going to read to you in paragraph 3. We're expressly told in verse 22, because in our paragraph comes later, that Chizkiyahu himself had asked for such a sign. Isaiah had recommended medical treatment to cure his illness, which we'll see there also. Chizkiyahu replied, Ma ot ki elevet Hashem, give me a sign that God will heal me and I'll go up again to the house of God. Chizkiyahu was afraid, it appears, that it might seem as if human medical means could effectively heal a person even after God had pronounced the fatal decree that the sick person would die. Sinai. He was all the more concerned to prevent such an impression because in his time, the worship of nature and physical phenomena placed great stress on drugs and potions closely associated with magic and spells, kosmim and nivonei lachash, leading the people away from confidence and trust in God. This assumption could be confirmed by the tradition that Ganaz Sefer Refuot v'hodu lo Chizkiyahu and his wisdom is hidden in the then existing book of remedies. According to what Rav Hirsch says, the reason why God is giving a sign, Chizkiyahu actually asks for the sign, but the reason why God is going to cause a miracle associated with his healing is so that everyone knows that the healing was miraculous. There shouldn't be any question about it, because we'll see later, or in Sefer Melachim, it appears right in this sequence of events, that God is going to tell him to take some fig, like a fig salve, and place it over his wounds, and it was going to heal the wounds.
Oh,
This is Rav Hirsch,
this-
Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. So that's one possibility. Okay, in terms of the Radak, however, the Radak is going to take an approach later on. We'll see it in Posei Chaf Aleph that says very simply, he's going to be healed from the wounds he's suffering from, but he wants to have promised that it's going to be a complete healing. The Mitzudat Sion says, no, it's totally different. That later on, when he's going to ask for the oath, Ma'ot, he's going to say, what is the sign? It's not what, but how great is the sign. Sometimes, Ma Norah HaMakom Hazeh. Okay, how wonderful is this place? The Ma doesn't always mean what, but it can also be how great. So we don't know if he really asked for a sign or not asked for a sign, but this is going to be the sign that he's going to get. And the oath, this is going to be the sign which God is going to give you. The sun is going to go back 10 degrees or 10 steps on the steps of Achaz, backwards. And in fact, that's what happened. Now, this is a illustration of the steps of Achaz that is found actually in a manuscript of Avigdor Balgansi's Perush, and comes from Al HaTorah, has this graphic. So the Al HaTorah website reproduces the graphic, and if you notice with the graphic, it's basically, we're talking about the equivalent of a sundial, but with steps, that every half hour, the shade or the shadow of the sun would appear on a different step. And this is the way they were able to tell time. Oh, huh? I held it this way, that the sun is coming from here.
I see.
Okay, sun is coming from here, and either it's coming up or it's going down.
Steps
Right,
down.
on the other side of the steps, so that the light went back the other way. Now, the simple explanation, which is not simple, is the medrash, which most people take as explaining this, that there is a medrash that when Achaz, Chizkiyahu's father, died, he was so wicked, there was a miracle that occurred, that on the day of his funeral, the sun set 10 hours faster than it should have, so that there should only be 2 hours of sunlight. And as a result, they couldn't give him all the honors. Okay, there's a medrash to this effect. And in effect, what we're saying is, okay, now we're going to back. We're resetting the clock. It was 10 hours ahead. Now we're putting it back 10 hours. Everything is settled, nice and beautiful. Huh? No, it would actually, according to the Medrash, it's actually the movement of the sun. The sun was moved back in the sky to 10 hours earlier, that day there was an extra 10 hours of the day. So instead of being 24 hours, it was 34 hours that day. There was another day, which instead of being 24 hours, was just 14 hours the day that Achaz had died. That's the Medrash on this. The Dat Sofrim says, it doesn't say that the sun is going to move back. It says that the sun on the steps of Achaz are going to move back. That these may have just been a sundial that Achaz had built. Okay? And it was the equivalent of a clock that he'd set. And the miracle was that at a time that should have been night, there was sunlight. And the sunlight was so bright that it appeared at a different pace. We aren't changing the movement of the sun or the movement of the earth in relation to the sun. We're just creating a miracle of light, of an additional 10 hours of light in that day when it should have been night. Now, the reason I mentioned both, and the reason I use the dot Sofrim on this, even though the dot Mikra says the same thing, is the dot Sofrim is a modern Haredi Perush, which is extraordinary on the Nach, and it's a legitimate approach to say that we're not going to follow the Medrash on this one. But either one says there was this miracle. It was a miracle that everyone could see, and that was the point of the miracle. It was something obvious. Now, if we're going to say in the time of Achaz that it was an eclipse, which is what Yafa is referring to, and that's why it was dark for those extra hours, which eclipse doesn't take 10, right? But what's the opposite of an eclipse? Because here you have to have 10 hours of light, okay? So somehow there is some phenomena of miracle that occurs that is outside the realm of nature, which is miracles. At this point is where Sefer Yeshayahu takes a complete different turn than Sefer Melachim. Here is going to be Chizkiyahu's prayer. And it's poetry that's going to be in the same classic form we've had of poetry of Sefer Yeshayahu. Some of the words are complicated, some of the words are easy, but it's the Michtav LeChizkiyahu. It's Chizkiyahu's letter. Melech Yehuda, that was written, he's the king of Yehuda, Bechaloto Vayechi Mechol Yom. When he took sick and when he was healed, or healed from his sickness. The Targum Yonatan says, "Ktav oda'al nisadid avid l'chizkiyahu." This is his letter of praise and thanks over the miracle that took place to heal him. Says Chizkiyahu, "Ani amarti." I said to myself, "Bidmi yamai elecha b'sha'arei Sheol." I thought that I was going to be cut off. Demei, we use this phrase in modern Hebrew nowadays. When someone dies very young, it's referred to demei chayai. When it's still like the Ibn Ezra says this is from demei chayai in his robust years, the years of his blood. Okay, the Hirsch says that actually demi yamai means the years of imagination, when I still have all these dreams of what the future is going to hold. I was cut down very simply. It says the Mitzudat Tzion b'chritat yamai. I died young. I was cut off early. I said to myself, I imagine that I'm going to die young, because that's what Yeshayahu said. B'sha'arei Sheol, and I'm going to be sent down to the gates of the Sheol is another, grave is one way of saying it. Another way again is saying it's abyss. It's referring to, again, punishment. Pukadati yeter shnotai, I will lose out on the remaining of my life. Pukadati often can mean it's been counted, but for example, Bamidbar, velonifkad mimeno ish v'yipaked makom David. Missing is also, I'm going to miss out on yeter shnotai, okay, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to take away the remaining of my years. Now, this is an interesting source of a machloket in the Gemara, by the way, whether or not the 15 years were years he was supposed to have, or years that were added on to his life that he never was supposed to have. Based on this pasuk, it seems to be that I've lost out on my added years. It seemed to be that they were years they were supposed to have. Okay. However, the Targum Yonatan says, "Pukadati yeter shnatai dichruni letav et vasaf al shnai." That the Targum Yonatan says I was going to be added. Okay, that basically he's saying, "Pukadati yeter shnatai." I am mentioning this all for good, says the Targum Yonatan, that this isn't like a moan. I thought I was going to die young, says the Targum Yonatan, but then I found out I'm going to have extra years. It's a statement of happiness. Amarti, I said, lo ereka, I won't any longer be able to see God. Now, interesting, the Yud and the Hey, according to Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, is a name of God that is only used by living people. Lo ametim yahalelu ka. And so here he says, I imagined that I was going to die, and therefore I'm not going to be able to use the name of God that is used only by those who are living. Rashi says, I imagine I wasn't going to see God in the Beit HaMikdash again. I would never be able to go back to the Beit HaMikdash. Ka be'eretz ha'chaim. God in the land of the living in this world. Lo abit adam od im yoshvei chadel. And I didn't think I was going to see people anymore who are living in Chadel. Now, Chadel, interestingly, is a machloket. There's two possibilities. Chadel, according to Rashi, are the people who have ceased to exist. Chadlu lichyot, who've stopped to exist. Okay, and therefore I thought I'm never going to be able to. Okay, lo ebit adam od im yoshvei chadal. The Ibn Ezra, however, says that chadal is actually a twisted words. It's referring to chalad, which is like tevel on this earth. I never thought I was going to see people on this earth. Dori nisav nigla mini koel roi. My dwelling, or another possibility, as the Dat Mikra suggests, the time that I'm going to dwell on this earth. So my time on this earth, I said to myself, the Dori, I said, Nisav Niglamini has traveled away, has run away from me. Okay. Ohel Roi, just like the tent of shepherds. A tent of a shepherd is constantly moving. It is as impermanent as possible, because he always has to move wherever the flocks are. Rashi says, by the way, Dorini Savni Glamini Koel Roi, my people, my cohort, people of my generation have gone away from me. Kipadati Kaoreg Chayai Midalab Yivatzeni, and I have been cut off, Kaoreg, like the weaver who cuts off the extra strings. Kaoreg Chayai Midalai Yivatzeni, also I have that which is the leftover strings that are still on the weaver's loom, but what's the board called?
The loom.
The what?
The loom.
No,
The-
the shaft, I don't know what
There's a
it is.
board where you tie the cords around, and I forgot the word in English. There's a word for it. That, huh? Well, no, this is the dala, the dala. So it's possible that this is referring to the strings that are remained. Oh, in Hebrew, best word is nowadays is moat, the moat. It's a stick, but when on a loom, where the leftover strings after you've finished have done. So according to Chayai Midalai Yivatzeni Miyom Ad Laila Tashlimeni, I've been cut off like this, like it's been cut off. Interesting. Rashi says no. Dala is talking about Gova, from my greatness. Okay, I have been brought down to impoverishment. I have lost all of my honor of my monarchy, he says. Miyom ad laila tashlimeni. It's like from day until night, everything has happened. The Radak says from the day of my illness until the night, tashlim yamai. I'm going to die in this one day. In 24 hours, it's all turned around. Okay, the Ibn Ezra says no. Miyom ad laila tashlimeni, that in the daytime, I'm not so sick, but at night, it's overwhelming. Shiviti ad boker ka'ari. He says, I've been placed to the morning like Ari. Now, if I take the approach that at night, it was a little easier, or night was harder, I'm sorry, then I understand that until the morning, I've been fighting. But the other possibility on this is Shiviti, I've imagined in my own soul, Ad boker ka'ari ken yishaber kol atzmotai, that just like the lion breaks the bones of his prey, so too will I be broken. Miyomad laila tashlimeni, and he refers to the previous refrain, ken yishaber kol atzmotai. Also, all of my bones will be broken. In other words, I'm going to die. Just the previous rephrase, I thought once again my life was over. Kisus agur kenatzavtzev. But like a swallow and a crane, I'm going to chirp. Ehege kiona. I'm going to coo like a dove. What does this mean? Rashi explains that because of the illness, all I have left is this weak voice. I don't have the power that I once had. And so I'm going to be just like a chirping bird that's going on. Dalu enai lamarom, my eyes are lifted to the heavens. Now, interesting, Hirsch says, Dalu enai definitely means my eyes are lifted to the heavens, but it's a very strange verb. He says the verb actually is dalal, dalid lamed lamed, which means to draw out, like a dali is a pail. So he says, I've come from these depths and now I'm looking all the way up. Hashem ashkali. He says, God, hold me back. Okay. According to the Mitzudat Zion, it's like, God, if you only hold me back from letting me die. Okay. According to Hirsch, he's saying, God, take from me whatever I owe. Araveni, and be my guarantor. According to Hirsch, not be my guarantor, take back from everything that I had, and even that which you had granted unto me. Ma'adaber, what can I say? Now, this most likely is the beginning of the praise. Rashi says, I'm beginning that this is the Shevach v'kilusin lefanav. I'm praising God. Okay. Malbim says there's nothing left for me to say. V'amarli v'uasa. That ultimately God has told me what's going to happen. He's going to heal me, and it's happening. Edada kol shenotai al mar nafshi. I am going to take slow steps, kol shenotai, according to the Mitzudat Zion, according to Hirsch. After having experienced this illness, I have a new appreciation for life. I'm going to take slow steps. Rav Hirsch says I'm going to savor every moment of my life, al mar nafshi, because of what the bitterness I went through. Another possibility is the possibility that is offered by the Dat Mikra, who says, Adada kol shenotai al mar nafshi, that I was unable to sleep, as opposed to years, that this is talking about my slumber. I have been unable to sleep like Shena because of the bitterness of my illness. In other words, ultimately, according to the Dat Mikra, this isn't the beginning of the praise. Like Rashi says, this is still part of the description of the suffering. Hashem alehem yichyu. God be on them so they can live. Ulechol bahen chaye ruchi, and in all of them should be the life of my spirit. Interestingly, if you notice, alehem and bahen are in two different forms. One is masculine and one is feminine. Rav Hirsch picks up on this, and he says that this is referring to the years that Chizkiyahu is being granted. And he says, God, over them, I want to have power, and totally non-PC now. I want to have the masculine power, alehem yichyu, ulechol bahen chaye ruchi, and I want to have the feminine understanding of the spirit. I'm understanding, I want to have a new life, in essence, is what I'm asking for. However, according to the Dat Mikra, the subject of this is the previous pasuk that was talking about the bones. God, heal me fully. Ve'tachalimeni v'hachayeni. And I want you to please make me strong and also grant me life. Make me strong in life. Simple explanation. Mitzudat says, no, v'hachayeni actually means heal me and give me long years. Let me live longer. Hinele shalom marli mar. He says, behold, for peace, this bitterness came to me. Now, interestingly on this, okay, that Rav Schwab talks about, and you find this in some of the Midrashim, that he's saying, Hinele shalom, at the time when you tell me that Sancheir is going to fall, marli mar, I can't handle the good news because I'm so embittered by knowing that I'm dying at this time. It's been so complicated for me to receive it. Okay. The other, Rashi says that Hinele Shalom, I got the good news that I'm going to live. Marli Mar, but there was a bitterness associated to it because I found out that the reason I'm going to live is not because of the things I did, but because of the things David HaMelech did. I realized that my life until now had a flaw within it. Rev Hirsch says, okay, that the way I should read this opening phrase, Hinele Shalom Marlimar, my bitterness were converted into shalom, into completeness and goodness in that sense. The Medrash says, Hinele Shalom Marlimar, the time when you're telling me that it's all going to be good, my problem, Marli Mar. I have two bitternesses. I have the bitterness that before me came my father, who was wicked, Achaz, and after me will come my son, Menashe, who is Achaz. So as much as you're telling me it's good now, I'm looking both directions, and my God, it's terrible. And you have desired that my soul should survive. Mishachat bli. The question is what this word bli means. According to the Mitzudat Zion, the simple explanation, it's nothingness. Like mishachat bli, from the depths of nothingness, coming from the word bet lamed hey. Bet lamed hey means to decay. However, the Datsofrim and Rashi takes a similar approach, but with a different end, says, I'm missing some words in here. That really the pasuk of the Datsofrim says, Mishachat mibli aitaz chut lekach. I have been saved from the abyss, even though I didn't deserve it. Rashi says, Mibli redati shachat. I have been saved without having to go down into the abyss. Why was I saved? Ki shlachta acharei gavcha kol chatai. Because you, God, in a very poetic fashion, he's saying it, have put all of my sins behind you. You've sent them over your back. Chai hu yodecha. I'm sorry, skip the pasuk. Ki lo sheol todeka, mavet yihalaleka. Now, says Chizkiyahu, I have been saved, but let's talk about this for a minute. And this is part of the sense of faith. Who are the ones who can give praise to God? The living. Those who are not sent into the abyss, those are the ones who can be grateful for you. The ones who can praise you, the ones who are dead, they can't praise you. Lo yisabru yordei vor el amitecha. The ones who are in the depths, they can't hope to see the fulfillment of everything you've promised. Chai hu yoducha. Okay. And everyone, each and every living person, is the one who yodecha kimoni hayom can thank you, can praise you like I am doing today. Now, interesting, the chai could also be, the Dat Mikra suggests, that it's the living ones who live. That one is a noun and one is an adjective to it. That the chai ducha kamoni, they're the ones who can be, who can praise you like I do. Av levanim, a father to the sons, yodia el amitecha, is the one who is able to ultimately teach and your Torah to the truth, your Torah. So here, according to some of the Meforshim, the only one who can praise God, people who are alive, and the ones who have a sense of continuity. It could be the moment where Chizkiyahu accepts that he made a mistake and that he needs to have children, that there needs to be an av lebanim, that there needs to be that continuation to the next step. Hashem lahoshieni, God is the one who's saving me. Neginotain, and again, kol yamei chayenu, and I'm going to play his songs, I'm going to sing his songs all of our lives, al beit Hashem. Al Beit Hashem means very simply to the house of God. That he's saying, now I'm able to know I've been healed. You have taken care of me. I didn't deserve it. I saw I came from somewhere else. There's regrets that I've suffered because I realized that I didn't have those chuyot on my own. But nevertheless, I now know I'm going to be able to fulfill my hope of going to the Beit Hashem, which he had mentioned earlier that he was going to miss. And now come to the final two psukim, and these final two psukim are psukim that really are out of place, but they end this piece. Vayomer Yeshayahu, before he was healed, the process of healing took place as follows. Yeshayahu tells him, Yisud velat te'enim, take a wheel of figs, Vayimrechu al hashchin vayechi, and place it over your wounds, and they will be healed. Now, this is a miracle in and of itself, because if you take, these are cut up figs that are placed in like this, the shape of a wheel. That's the way they used to use it. That they actually are very acidic, and they can actually create wounds on a person's skin. So Yeshayahu tells him, I want you to do something. You're going to see it's miraculous. The problem is, again, that here, Vayomer Chizkiyahu ma'ot, where's a sign? Kia le Beit Hashem, that I'll be able to go up to the Beit Hashem. So the ma'ot, which I had mentioned earlier, one possibility is ma'ot. What an amazing sign that this is. The other possibility is I'm asking for a sign because people will think that if they hear he put this magical potion on him, that it has nothing to do with God. I need to have a sign. I need to have a miracle that the rest of the people will be able to understand that this truly is a miraculous event. We're finished with the parak here. Next week, we're going to get into the last parak of Yeshayahu, Parak Lamed, the last story, parak of Yeshayahu, in the first part of Yeshayahu. Some of you may, I'm sure, are familiar with the idea that there are two Isaiahs, that according to modern scholars, not from the religious world, they maintain there were two different Isaiahs because the second half of the book after next week is so very different. I'm just going to share with you a thought that someone mentioned to me. Someone once raised this with Rav Amitai, that there are those about the two Isaiahs, and Rav Amitai said, halavai, there would have been 100 Yeshayahs. Okay, so to having two is not okay, but we'll see that as well. The next parak will be a little bit of a shorter shir because it's a shorter parak. We'll stop here.